Welcome to Canada Bangladesh Social Justice Action Research Alliance. We organize critical and courageous conversations about local and global issues that are connected to equity, fairness, and social justice. Our conversations are organized so that these conversations contribute to critical consciousness for anyone who cares about social justice, cares about a more compassionate and a more considerate world. I often quote one of the most remarkable African American civil rights activist, very remarkable Black woman, Fannie Lou Hamer. In the words of Fannie Lou Hamer, nobody is free until everybody is free. Today, my guest, Saadia Azim, is a remarkable writer, and I have had the opportunity of reading her recently published book, Narrow Lane and Other Stories. Saadia Azim is a policy specialist at a diplomatic mission in India and former TV journalist and media trainer. Our conversations will be multi-layered, and to the extent we have our freedom, we will be engaging in a critical conversation. Uh, so without further ado, Saadia, thank you very much for making some time for us. Welcome to our conversation.
Thank you, Firoz. Assalamu alaikum. And I really feel honored to be, talking to you. We actually met on social media, and that's how, we came to know of each other. So, this is a very powerful medium, and I feel really privileged to have this platform to talk about the narrow lane and other stories. I don't think any other time but this, when there is political strife, upheaval, struggle, disruptions, and then an undue calm around, like how we are reacting to this as human beings. I mean, like, I don't think so any other time would have been better than to discuss my book. And so it's a very ordinary and a small book of 12 stories, but finding space to talk about it in your platform is really a privilege. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Saadia. Question: as I was reading the stories, and I feel there are so many layers that we need to um, deconstruct to understand the social reality of India today, and how much what is happening in India is also connected to, and in many ways, the global political environment, the global cultural environment, how much it is informing and reinforcing the hegemonic oppressive structures in India. So we will go into that discussion. First of all, Saadia, could you tell us a bit about yourself? That who are you as a person? How did you come to see the world the way you see? Obviously, as authors, we write ourselves in our stories. So please tell us a bit about your subjectivity, your background, and your upbringing.
Yes. So, thanks, Firoz. And talking about myself is, just an ordinary person. I work, and I have not been a writer, neither a trained, creative writing person. Uh, I would say that, yes, I did build up on my capabilities of telling stories is during my time as a journalist, and then I went on to work to a diplomatic mission. So it's completely like any other ordinary life. And then, like, you see things happening around you, and they move you, and they, create those sleepless nights for you, and you don't know what to do with it. And that's how this entire idea of the story. So when you read these stories, all of them are very realistic. I mean, people who are living in India and probably in South Asia would be able to relate it. Many of the people in the family actually told me, so what, I mean, this is like new, and this is nothing new. I mean, this is happening every day, and where is the story in this? And that's where, it made me rethink as to why I should compile these stories, because that's how, we react to situation which should otherwise would have moved you to the core. It would have like pushed you and pulled you around and let you go berserk. But actually, like ordinary people, we have just learned to accept it. And that was where I started writing and compiling. These stories were written over a period of time, and they belong to my, and that's happening every day. I mean, if I go back and look through in the last 2 decades, it was there, we have been seeing around. As I told you, they are like ordinary stories which you would be able to relate to. But what have we been able to do with it was the question in my mind when I actually wrote the stories. So I wanted to write this story, and that's where this book came in.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you, Sadia. The title of our today's conversation, because as I was reading the story and I was thinking about the conversation, is that how do you tell stories? How do you use fiction to tell the facts? And I say this because if we dig into the history of literature, we can see that so many great writers and authors, when they did not have the freedom to tell the truth, they took the creative medium to tell the truth. And I often, I'm a, I mean, I often say this word very consciously, that I'm an unapologetically Bengali Muslim living in a predominantly a country where the status of a hyphenated Bengali. So I think that my lived experience in Canada gives me a lot of the sources to understand. And it's funny that I was born and raised in Bangladesh, but now I live in Canada. And my experiences of living these two places have given me a lot of points that I could relate to your stories. Now I'll go one by one, as many stories as we can cover today. And I'm going to ask you to, um, you have written story, but then there is a political economy. Then there is a political reality. And wanting to hear from you firsthand that what moved you, the analysis, and if you want to give our readers a kind of idea. So the first story that you have written in your book is the story name is One Day in December. My understanding, the story talks about the story of a family losing everything. Story of a family when in India the currency changed. All of a sudden, people's savings were gone. Could you, walk us through the story and tell us the brutal end? And one thing I have seen the pattern in your story that all the ends um, are sad. They're not triumphant. They're not, in the Marvel stories, of Disneyland. In the end, defeated the underdog wins. In your stories, underdogs don't win, and which I love about. Could you tell us about the story? One Day in December.
Yeah. Thanks, Firoz. So, just before I tell you about the story, I
Mhm.
wanted to tell you about, my lived experience. So I am, a Bengali Muslim, not born in Bengal as such, but born in Bihar, in the neighboring state Bihar. And I learned Bengali is only when I came to West Bengal, and I started living here. And that's how, I can speak a bit of Bengali. And, personally, I'm again a Bihari Muslim who got married to a Hindu some 2 decades back. And and you can imagine, that time too, there were differences in communities, because it is, marrying between these two faith in our nation in India is is not just socially unacceptable, but it is basically a kind of blasphemy. It is not uh, but 2 decades back, I have to tell you, it wasn't that bad for me, like when it was unacceptable. People were like hostile, but they were not killing me. Now you see, in these 2 decades, the difference is you would see people dead. And that's what is, and like, I would not even talk about who is killing whom, but what I would talk about is, as a larger community, what is our reaction to that kind of deaths, killings, grief, or pain. And you would be surprised that now, when I come back to talk about the book and the One Day in December, this is a story about a small, like 7 8 year old girl who lives down the pavement. And the whole source of their income, one fine day goes away, is because they deal with cash, and the government decides, the government is the top authority of a country of 135 billion, like 1.35 billion people. And you can imagine, they lose all their currency. And what kind of, it is not just about whether you are able, it's a governmental policy, it's governance. You imagine that somebody who has saved, each day's earning for such a long time, and they come to know that tomorrow this money becomes just plain paper. I mean, this notes are of no use. And what would happen to a woman whose entire life's saving just goes in vain? And she comes and starts again. That there is resilience, I will tell you, in the stories. And this happened not just with one family, but it happened everywhere around in some form or the other. It did touch people's life. And like in Asifa's story, they lost the money, and then they leave the place of their birth. They have to move on. They don't have a place, they don't have a country. I mean, so like people who would think that, okay, this is India, is their country, they are born here, they're not even sure that whether this is their land or not, whether they will be able to live and grow, and in that place, and enjoy the happiness of being in your own land, in your own home. These people became homeless. They came and started living in a bigger city because there were opportunity. Probably they will be able to feed themselves, and with hopes of just getting 2 course of meal. And then the day they get the 2 course of meal, the girl loses her father, because it was December and it was very cold. So you can imagine the worth of a life. And this story is basically talking, this is what happens not just to one family. It's not one of a story, it's not a story of any triumph or a victory. It's a story of ordinary, as I told you, it's a story of ordinary people. And they live like this. And this is where, their share of happiness and their share of grief lies. Their mornings and days are spent every day, earning their small bit. And you imagine, somebody else can decide. So it is no freedom, it is no life, it is not even a life of an animal, which is still free. You could see animals or a cockroach going around. I know that in India there were some talks about some people growing as cockroaches, which is again a political story. But I'm telling you, a cockroach is but free, a human being is not. So you can, like, and because your entire life, your earning, where you live, is all decided by similar kind of people, by people with with the same kind of life, in the same country, in the same region, but see the difference. So I would not call it as diversity, I would rather call it as, like, the game of power. And so
Mhm.
people should know about it.
Mhm.
People should know how to deal with it, and people should know that, like, how by human, like, by our own intervention, we are making life hell for a hell lot of people.
Yeah, yeah. And the I often, when I was reading this story, the first story, I was so moved. I My lived experience is from a small village in Bangladesh. Then we moved to Dhaka city, where we. I don't know if you have visited. I mean, I know that you're born in Bangladesh, and then you also subsequently. I was thinking that my own experience of coming from village to the city and understanding that how insignificant your existence is in the midst of bustle and rustle where you're nobody.
And nobody to decide for yourself, for your own life.
Yeah, yeah.
And like,
And
and
when
it hurts,
yeah,
and
and
it
when
hurts.
Asifa's father, yeah, and when Asifa's father dies, towards the end of the story, when Asifa's father, I mean, this is a homeless family. their joy in finding a blanket. I mean, this is what I think we often fail to see, that how little these people have. I I wish I knew how to speak Hindi well. I understand, but I don't speak it. Um, there's a poem recently that got published by a very brilliant young poet from Delhi. Uh, is that the government sponsored cruelty? And he talks about that, I will write so brightly even the blind will see. uh, I was thinking that the brutal death of Asifa's father and Asifa's joy in seeing her father holding a packet of biryani, I was thinking. And then Asifa's mother telling Asifa that, I have given your father's eyes to this family, and your father will be able to see it. Why? I know that these stories are inspired by real life events. Could you tell us that, what made you bring that twist in the story, that Asifa's father died, but his eyes are given?
Like so this is very interesting actually, because this story has been picked from a lot of people who are living under a flyover, a very prominent flyover, which is across a hospital in Kolkata. And this did happen, in reality. And so there are agents around, like who would who would look for people. And it is not just about eyes. There is a lot of organ donation kind of thing which happens around. And in this particular area where recently, like somebody, I have to give you this example, that somebody uh, you know came in to me, a friend who's known to, and they needed a kind of donor for their ailing son, who was, who has a kidney ailment. And it was like, you know what, kidneys are available for 5 lakh of rupees around, so please, we just need a donor. And people fail to understand that it's not human beings who are making kidneys. you know they are natural. In in the same way, most people, all these people who are living across this flyover, under the flyover, are blood donors. So that's again interesting, that people would come in and they say that we want blood, for my ailing, my family member, and I am going to pay you this much. But they fail to understand that this blood is not, you can't actually compare it with the money, is because you can't create it. You haven't been able to create blood. So this, the ending actually came in because of some of the experiences what I had seen around. It was necessarily not with the eyes, but the twist was the eyes. But actually, I have seen people going and bargaining for organ donation, and just after death, there is, and particularly people who die on the, on the footpath. We don't know what happens with the dead bodies. So that the last rites, we haven't seen it, the last rites being conducted. What happens, it's such a huge population, particularly in Kolkata, which lives out in the open under the sky. But I don't know, I would really want to ask any of the viewer or anybody around, "Ki, have you seen a very big procession, or any sort of rituals happening for people who die on the footpath?" We don't know what happens with them. So so you understand.
As a reader, what it felt, that, my grandfather, my grandmother, my great great grandmother, she is in me. I am living through her eyes right now. All the love, affection, sadness, heartbreak, they live in me. And there are research right now that intergenerational trauma, that how our ancestors have experienced brutality, they live on,
Right.
they get past. through our genetic or hereditary, yeah. So I was thinking that Asifa's father is not just Asifa's father; it's just a mass of people. I I attended a conference where a Bangladeshi social scientist teaching at an American university at the moment did a study that how in a very impoverished district of Bangladesh, people sell their organs to survive, to pay off the debt. They sell their kidney. And what happens, you have buyers across the world. In the Foucauldian term, we call it bio-violence, when your body
Yeah.
becomes a commodity for profit
Hmm.
in a capitalist society. Yeah, so that was, I was thinking that Asifa's father's organs getting bought and sold is not just that, just what is the global ethos. In the next
Yeah, and
story,
like
go.
what what actually strikes me more deeply is what's the reaction of the larger community or the privileged community. I mean, like, how do we react to this story? Do we feel for it? Do we, when we go back, to our own rooms, to our bed, do we think about it? Do we really think, or we think that no, God has created us really, like as a privileged human being, or somebody who is extraordinary, who are entitled to some more benefits than others? Do we think it this way, or we really think that or we really think that we are meeting the same end, like, are approaching the same kind of end in some form or other? So that's one point which actually keeps on coming back to me. And like, and I keep on thinking as to how should I react, what should I do, how much can I do? Does it bother me? Does it make me really, more, does it make me go mad? Or or it hurts me deeply, I like, or it doesn't, like, I have seen people who would throw in, I mean, you would see other stories also, it's all about poverties. And like, you would see people throwing half eaten apple to somebody, or people who are begging on the street and they are being shooed away. So what the feeling of the larger community, or I would say the privileged community, goes on? I mean, how do we grow as a human being?
Yeah, yeah. I found a very depressing piece of neuroscience in the literature that literally power has a capacity to the region of our brain that feels compassion literally starts working less or it doesn't work when we're power is very intoxicating, privilege is very blinding, conviction is a very stubborn blindness. So I was thinking, so one of the, I think through the stories, I'll move to the next story question, that factory and the rice field, where two young, I mean, this is such an innocent love between two young people and the two
Yes.
classes and the
Mhm.
government's capacity to, it's interesting. So I will ask you to tell our audience, what is the story
So
in
this
the
this
end.
really happened in Bengal. This
It
is a
happened.
real story. It
Yeah,
happened. It
yeah,
happened
yeah.
in Bengal, and like, it happened in two different places in different ways, but it has been clubbed together because it's a work of fiction.
Hmm.
But it did happen. And it's so surprising that there were a lot of the entire political movement actually happened around a love story, something like this.
Hmm.
And it's over, it's gone out of people's mind. Those kids, I would say kids, they were very young,
Yeah, yeah,
young people,
yeah,
and they're dead,
yeah,
and they were
yeah,
killed.
yeah.
and,
They were killed. Yeah.
and yeah, and the entire community now lives happily. I mean, like, whether they live happily or not, I just want to find out whether people grieve on the losses which happened, or they move on with the accomplishment which these opportunities bring for you.
Hmm.
So this story was basically, with the thought of whether, the death of somebody in my locality, a neighbor or a friend or, a family, does bring a remarkable change in my mind or not, or, or I find it as an opportunity and move on.
One of the themes that I
I
find
have
in
always felt, very deeply as to when the governments basically, try and compensate these kind of, acts of violence in terms of money. So when you measure it and you try and compensate, compensation is fine because they need it, but
Mhm.
whether it's a way to build that kind of resilience, whether it's a, way to actually make people accept facts and then, move on, I don't know, I don't know, okay, how easy it is to get really compensated in terms of, monetary benefits and then move on.
Yeah, I think monetary benefit is a way of invisibilizing the lives that have been lost. Monetary benefit probably numbs our heart that, oh, my son has been brutally murdered, but I have been compensated. And this is where I feel conflicted, Sadia. I feel very conflicted because I have known events in the villages of Bangladesh where a brutal end of life was somewhat settled with a monetary compensation, and the compensation was taken by the parents. So I felt in the beginning sad because the life that I'm talking about was my student. But then a friend of mine, an anthropologist, she whacked me to senses. She was saying that, look, you have the privilege even to feel sad. The parents of that little girl does not have the privilege to feel sad. You have a privilege to muse over a loss and grieve. Not everybody has the privilege to grieve. Could you tell us about the story and some social realities that inspired you to write that story?
So this story was, during a time of political movement which was already happening between the landless laborers. Even now, you would see that in another state in India, farmers were, this is a news and this is like latest news from India, is that few farmers were crushed under the wheel of, you know, by of a very high range, high end vehicle, which was being driven by the minister's son, because he was opposed to the protest against the political party. I mean, this story is weaved around a kind of political unrest between the landless and the landowners. So this is also very interesting. Is how do really people feel to own land? Like, just because your parents have owned it, and whereas the others, you think that they do not have, that land, and they can't, they are not, they are landless people. So I fail to understand, if somebody is landless, what happens to them, and why shouldn't there be a system as to, like, if they have to live on the land, they can't remain landless ever. So this story was particularly based, like, lived during the time when there was a political unrest between the landless laborers. I mean, the ones who do not have land have no other option but to actually fight back to own their piece of share somehow, legally or illegally, whether you accept it or you don't, because land is where people live. Yeah. And you know that this is also a love story between two people, from two different communities, like from the two sides, the landless and the landlords who own it, the landowners, and how they were brokering, their own vision of the world and growth and progress and development, with the landowners thought that a factory was required, the landless thought that they need land to live. They do not even have a toilet. So, like, you can imagine the imbalance, and that's where, because of the political strife, these two families lost their son and the daughter who were in love, and they would have made such a happy couple had they lived through, and had they, and they would have made family and, like communities, and they did not have that opportunity, is because their own communities did not let them have it.
Yeah, they have not, they have been murdered brutally.
Yeah. Yes.
And it feels that one theme that runs through your stories, that love in the current political economic climate is punished brutally, whether it is the other story where the lynching of a man, young man, in broad daylight. We'll come to that story. There is a line that touched me so deeply, that the girl is saying, quote, crops live, feed, grow, and die like us. The girl thinks. It is from her school book. And I was thinking, it's funny that even this in your the story's protagonist, this girl, even at this young, tender age, her attachment to the land where she grows crops, her attachment to the land where she lives, and I think what was the real kicker, I mean, punch in that cut, in the end, the girl's father owns a vehicle. Why did you bring that twist? Could you
Yeah.
could you could you tell us?
Because that's how the political twist happened. You know, like you broke it, as I was saying, it was kind of compensation. And because and in a democracy, you basically think that either you are this side or you're that side, you know but you don't think that ultimately we all have to live here. This is one piece of land, so either we share and live, like happily, or we kill each other and get compensated for a while. I mean, these compensations also do not live all the time. This has to end. So, given the kind of uncertainty of our own lives, I don't know why do people go and, kill each other. Or and the saddest part about this story is the killers are your own community. The killers are ordinary people. Killers are like you and me, who are not noted criminals, who we can, we don't need psychoanalysts to actually, get into their brain to think, why are these people on a killing spree? They are like, they're all like us, and still they go and they participate in an act of violence so easily, and they get away with life. That's what is the most saddest part about my stories.
Yeah, and I think, and this is what I mean. I mean, one of my very favorite authors. He writes on dehumanization. He's written 11 books so far. I had a conversation. One of his latest books is getting published on October 14th. So Professor David Livingston Smith is studying for the past 40 years that how ordinary people can become cruel beyond our imagination in moments of crisis. But you know what matters, what makes me think, Sadia, that yes, ordinary people become cruel. We have seen that in 1947. We continue to see in Indian context the minorities, in other contexts is also the minorities. Um, but there are people who create that socio-economic condition of cruelty. um, People who are striving to survive just to get by. If you take that last bit of resources that they're living on, what do we expect the turnout to be?
That's surprising. I mean, like, it actually like, I have seen people who have lived all their life, being, I mean, like, probably relatives or mothers, particularly mothers or parents, who have lost their children, even if they are compensated in some way or the other. They don't live enough. After that incident actually changes, disrupts completely the course and the kind of person that uh, they are. But, like, if you see the larger community and the reaction and the ability to forget and move on, an ability to think that this is so normal. I mean, it happens. It has happened before. You would see politicians and powerful people come up with that kind of, argument that, okay, this has happened because this has been happening all the time. So so how do you measure, human growth? How do you measure, your education? How do you measure your, your resilience or our learning? I mean, how do we measure a civilized world? Then call it uncivilized, as we were, in the early days, where we did not even think about it. Today, the good thing, Feroz, that we are talking about it is fine. But again, like going back, I always tend to go back to think that, did I react enough? Did I do enough? Or should I have done enough? Or is this enough? you know so these are the questions which keeps haunting me all the time. And maybe most of the stories, the basis of most of the stories, are actually that, because I don't know whether the grief, the pain, the loss is enough, you know and whether we are grieving enough. And if we are not, why do we have to have that kind of, you know toxic positivity, thinking about, oh, everything is fine or everything is getting better? It is not. It is not getting better. So we will have to do something to make it get better, at least to realize that, the pain, the cruelty, what we probably incur on others, would, if it comes back to us, is going to be the same amount of pain which it will cause to us. So I don't know if this realization, if we're not able to inculcate this kind of realization in the larger community, then that's a failure for humankind.
Yeah, I think we are obsessed with success. We are intoxicated for material desire at the cost of the death of our inner self. Rabindranath Tagore, in one of his last essays, I think it was the last essay, uh, Shobhota Shankot, The Crisis of Civilization. Yeah. Um, a very sad realization he expressed, that in his youth he thought that the light of civilization, modernity, humanity will rise from the West. But at the end of his life, he's no longer confident.
Mhm,
One other thread that I have found in your stories is the brutality of border,
mhm.
deciding who is a citizen.
Yeah.
And I was reflecting on the fact, and I was talking the other day with a friend of mine, and I also shared it. Show me one country in a post colonial world that has not been victims of these three things: A, imperialism and coloniality; B, the ideology that imperialism and colonialism needed for its propagation; and three, or C, is that the border that was artificially created by these imperialist powers. I mean, Europe was the most savage place for over I think centuries. They were fighting with each other. And I say this to you with all humility and compassion and respect and love. Please, consider it that way too. I often say to my friends who Bengali friends on the other side of the border, because if you remember, in 2011, the brutal death of a 15-year-old Bengali girl felony by the border security force. And when I teach this to my students, I say that, look, the bullet that killed felony was rooted in the border that was drawn by the British. I mean, what is West Bengal? What the hell does it mean? I mean, you were hailed from a place where it's culture, ways of living, the story that informs your sense of self, the mythology, the ethos. We have the same ethos. You and I have the same mother. How the hell am I pulling the trigger to end your life? So I say this because right after, and I'm going to put you into a very uncomfortable situation to think about border. One is national border, and the other one is ideological border, borders of faith. That in Kolkata, where you live, Sadia, you are a Muslim. Your name is unmistakably Muslim name, just as my name is unmistakably Muslim name. I would feel worried to travel many parts of India, despite of having a brown skin, despite of having all South Asian dispositions. Just as I feel here many times worried, scared, because, well, my name is unmistakably Muslim name. It starts with Muhammad. Deal with it. What inspired you to imagine? What made you see these borders of ideology, borders of religion, borders of artificially created Western modernity, the countries? Could you tell us about it?
Like this is what is again, a very surprising factor, that we think that everything is in, it's the system. This is how we have been able to probably organize the world in terms of countries and borders and governance, and and this is how we live. But this is true that we could be living like this, but this is ideally not the best, because otherwise there would not have been so much of conflict. And if it is not able to resolve the conflict of a human species, of the same kind of species, that means there's something terribly wrong with it. I mean, the system is not probably working. And if you have the best brains, as we always say, that that human beings have the best brains amongst all creatures, all God's creatures. So if we have the best brain, we should think for a better idea, rather than, rather than having this idea where people are at the killing spree. People want that, like my country would be saved if I go and basically attack somebody else's country. Or if I stop a felony to jump a border, my country will be safe. I mean, that is, that, that is something which people have to deeply think about. And uh, you know um, and think that this is not doing any good to the human species. We want, you were talking about materialistic aspects, the things what we try and hoard and keep, and that's all fine, but ultimately we are not able to hold it. The point is, you reach a point where you have to let it go. So yeah, I mean, at this point we haven't reached that level. So why are we doing it? you know why are we, is it giving us any sort of, is it giving the human beings, is it giving, all these, people with different skin colors and different names, and names which make them different, like what we are facing in India right now. And you were talking about these ideological border. Is it doing any good to us, or is it making us more vulnerable? So if it is, and if we think that we have the best of the brains, and we are, accepting things which is not doing any good to us, so why shouldn't we think about something more collective, something more safe, something more, like something which can make life better rather than worse? And now we are in a situation where life is not getting any better. As I said, it is rather, getting, it is not about I killing somebody and getting away with it. It is about, when I kill somebody, I turn to be a killer, and I remain a killer for all, like all my life. So
Mhm.
it's a choice. Do we
Yeah.
want to be a killer, or we can find a better idea where we are able to actually live with others, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I understand it. Now let's in this, let's push further to deconstruct the weaponization of identity. Your identity can be weaponized. It's a very Conviction is a very dangerous weapon. It's a very dangerous weapon. When you and I were told in our childhood, in our schools, by our parents, by uh, all the wise and old men around, women around us, that humans are the best of creation. To me,
Creatures
you know
of
what it is.
creations of
I
God.
I want to rephrase it this way when I teach students or when I talk to my kids, is that humans have the potential to be the best of creation, but most often, most of us become the most dangerous, each of us. And I say this with absolute humility, that there is a Hitler and Modi in me. There is in me. Modi is not different. He's a human. The question is that I want to understand what makes Modi Modi. What made Trump Trump? There is something, right? So next story, Killing. You say, I'm sorry. The story in Killing, the story of a girl called Joy, a Christian girl, goes to church. You start with a wonderful verse from Bible, and then she sees a lot of messages on WhatsApp that, where are you, run to a safe place. And then she's rescued by a Muslim girl wearing burqa, wearing hijab. And then Joy thinks, like, who is she in the train? And then oh, this Muslim girl, her the boy he loved was brutally murdered in broad daylight. And after the lynching, the policeman said, well, it was killed by mob. The teacher said, that's not the intent, that wasn't the intention. Could you be brutally honestly, I mean, I know this is heartbreaking. Could you tell us about that story and weaponization of identity?
So this story was based again on a very like on a real incident where people in the northeastern part of India, which has a certain culture, and they talk about tribes. So tribes are very particular, and this is also like a story about women, like how women are oppositions at homes, even still, like even now in, I think it's all across the world, but I would admit that in South Asia or in most of our countries it is like more. So women, I mean, she dared to fall in love with a guy of a different tribe or different culture, and the man, just because he was in love, he was killed, he was lynched. And again, the saddest part was,
Public lynching, Sadia.
yeah, public lynching. And
Yeah.
here this woman, another girl, she was a witness. And this was probably, like, I see myself in these kind of situation, because like Joy represented somebody like me who did not know that when you witness something like this, what you do, are you doing enough? And like, are we human enough? Like, I keep on thinking is, okay, I have read this, I haven't like really witnessed such kind of incident, but I don't know what I would do. Like, I read it all the time in newspapers, these stories come in. And of late, lynching is a very very common word.
Hmm.
Before
Hmm.
some years back, I don't think so it was as common, and we did not even think that. I used to know of a word called witch hunting, which was very common in India at that time, during my growing up times, where they used to probably kill a widow, or like, or somebody, a woman, basically, who was lonely, alone, like minority, who did not have anybody to save her. And the larger community would just go and kill her, because she brought in some bad woman in the locality, or probably she was a bad influence. But now whatever has been happening is lynching in broad daylight. Lynching means, again, people who are influential, educated. So this gets me back to think, does education really teach you? And if it teaches you, then it teaches you what? Does it teach you how to respond to a certain kind of violence? The violence which will have an impact on your own life, even though you are not a party to it, you're just witnessing. It is going to have an impact. It will make you a changed person for the rest of your life. And then also we don't know how to react. We don't know what we would do in those circumstances, and we are not prepared enough. So why is that so? Why have we been spending so much of time in reading books and learning about resilience, and like talking about positivity and hope, and like all sort of good things, but why can't we pick those those traits basically? Why doesn't it make me a changed person? And so in Joy's story, it was basically, like I was talking about myself, that I did the same. Probably my like heartbeats grew, and I was palpitating when I saw a lynching. But I did not. That's not enough. If I walk away, and if I walk away with the same kind of guilt of not doing enough, that that doesn't make me, again, that makes me a changed person all my life. I would not be the same as what I was before. And why
Mhm.
would I agree to that?
Yeah,
So
and let me quote a few lines from this story, that when this young man was publicly lynched, people who came to kill him were chanting, "Women are our honor. Women are our pride. Women are our deity." The supporters cheered in response. The man in the chain cried for help. "It's the punishment by the Lord," people said in reply. People then walked around as hunters, showing around the hunted. And then you write something that got me. I was thinking, with each killing, one also kill portion of their soul. I mean,
yeah,
I just wondered that how many convictions, how many, Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, he's one of the philosophers with hammer. He said conviction is more dangerous to truth than lies itself.
yeah, yes,
I don't know if a system is built on conviction. How do we wake up? And when you wake up, by the way, and then I love one of the phrases that you've used, that toxic positivity, that if you wake up, you will carry a profound pain in you perpetually. It's not going to go.
yeah.
You will have that unconscious burden all the time. And therefore, we somehow numb ourselves with all the laughter and
Is
cheer.
it, like that's where like my thing comes in this Joy story, that when it numbs you and you live with it, why, like how changed you become? Is there a realization? And so why would you agree to do that? Why can't we like think of a collective way? I mean, like, you know majority, we don't even know in that kind of killing, even the people who were chanting, who were a party to the killing, did have a conscience, and whether they also became as numbed as Joy when they went back home. So the question comes in, that why did they agree to that kind of thing? Why did they not think enough or feel enough? Why did the crying or the pain of one person did move the rest? And that gets back to really think and rethink as to why it doesn't move us enough.
Let me tell you something very sad and unfortunate. As a teacher, I think so. John Dewey's argument was that every child is born an artist at heart. Every child is born with that life inside us. But if you let that life flourish, it's not possible for us to control that child. In order to control and turn that child into, and this is the kicker, a
Mhm.
citizen, a consumer, you will have to kill that child in that child. So when we go to school from childhood, or we go to church, or mandir, masjid, so whether it is a school, or this church, whether it is family, we are all indoctrinated with intoxicating convictions. Bharat Mata ki Jai, right? What the hell does it mean? What I mean, imagine, and I often give this example, that people who are American, they believe in their fictitious Americanness so much that they are ready even to end a life. Now, question is, and do you think about it, Sadia? I don't think what makes us cruel is not things that we don't know. I think what makes us cruel are the things that we know but we don't question.
Yeah.
That's what makes us cruel. So, I mean, now in the next story, two gods. It's what, to me, it's one of the most beautiful stories I have read in recent times. Is that understanding generations that were, again, when I was reading, I was thinking Sadia has a thing against love. she Which means I think you deeply respect love, I think you deeply care about love, but in your stories it seems like love gets punished all the time. Could you tell us about the story of two gods?
So, it's a lived experience, Feroz. As I told you, that I'm married in the Hindu family. So, like, I have the two sides, and it worked. It works till today, 2 decades later. So I keep telling all the people that if you want to make a relationship work, it works. It's not those ideological differences which make you any different. It is something which you want to carry and you want to pursue, is what makes you different. So, two gods is basically about, somewhat like, it's not my own story, but the situation is the same. Is like, I myself am married in a mixed faith, home. And, for all these 2 decades, I've tried to balance the two. So in this story, this is a sad story, is because, it's about, a woman who has lost her, like her. And you must have heard about these kind of stories in India recently. There were stories about love jihad, they call it. If there's a mixed faith or a cross faith marriage, it's called love jihad. And mostly, Muslim men have been either killed or lynched or probably ended up in jail. There are laws in certain states which actually, prohibits women to choose their partners. Even if they are adults, they can't marry cross, to people from other faith. And surprisingly, these couples who are adults, who are working professionals, they will have to register in front of the district magistrate, and and like, actually agree to not converting to each other's religion. So religion is by birth and not by choice, not by learning. So you can imagine, and these are the laws which has come up recently, like during my time, 2 decades back. When I'm talking about, I have a special, there was a special which still exists. This is a special marriage act in India, where people from two faiths can go and still remain who they are and get married in the in the court. Now certain states in India do not allow that, and for that to happen, they will have to give they have to take the permission of the district collector to, to get married. And there have been men who have ended up in jails, and women who have, backtracked. And in this particular story, it is not about, about the husband again, the wife losing the husband, who she chose. And she chose more than the faith and the God, she chose love. and decided to convert, because in most cases in India, women, they are anyway, they do not live in their own homes, and they go and start living in the homes of their husbands, and obviously they will have to follow that culture. And by virtue of your surroundings, you tend to follow that faith. So this story was about that, is about a young couple who were from different faiths, and how they went on to live, and and faced the kind of hostility from the girl's parents. And it's not just the girl's parents, it's actually the community around as well. And then she loses her husband to an accident. But imagine, in this story particularly, she lives with the kind of guilt, and with the kind of a thought that whether it was because of a choice that a husband was killed. At one place she says that, was it his faith or her fate? you know so she doesn't know what she lost her husband for, what reason. But yes, because she has lived with the kind of um, teachings and with the kind of indoctrination, that probably if you marry people from the other community, which is prohibited by religion, something happens. But believe me, I am there, a living example. Nothing happens. The world remains the same, even if you're married people from other communities.
Yeah, but I would also want to deconstruct it further, that you being married to a Hindu family and not choosing to change your faith is probably an exception, not probably an example in most cases.
Yes, yes. Because, we decided to go by the law. And, I know that many Muslims, particularly religious leaders, are very, I would say, self proclaimed faithful people would actually term me as a non Muslim.
Yeah.
They would call me now that, oh, no, that is not by practice. So she doesn't remain a Muslim. But I don't know. I mean, I believe in Allah, and I think that He would be the one who would be able to actually, decide whether I am a real Muslim, whether I remain a real Muslim or I don't, if I marry outside the community. I mean, I would not go by what other people tell me, because I don't know whether they are Muslim enough. So, but yes, you are right. But yes, you are right that I don't buy, and that's the point. Most of the Muslims would not consider me a Muslim. So many places I have to be, either consciously not declare myself as, uh, in a situation or in a marriage which is cross faith, or for the also the safety of my family and my daughter. So I mean, it's a risky situation, but we belong to a very minuscule minority, who are minorities amongst the minorities. And so imagine the kind of vulnerability with which we live.
Yeah, yeah.
So the religious, the faithful, they actually think that these liberals should be killed. Like, oh, she's trying to poison the minds or the system which has been created for all this while.
Yeah, yeah.
But
And
instead,
also what's what is almost mind-boggling, and okay, I'm gonna do it anyway. So you see, it's interesting that if a Muslim man wants to marry a woman from the book, means either
yeah.
from Judaism, Christianity, or that's okay. If a Muslim man, but if it is a woman,
Mhm.
uh-uh. And I'll tell you something. I lived 2 years in Saudi Arabia. When you're talking about caste and when you're talking about faith conflict, so I was working there as a high school guidance counselor, and I would take my students to different debate competitions. So there I met people from other universities, places, and etc. So in Saudi Arabia, there is a, I don't know what's the English word for bongsho, like what hereditary line that you come from, bloodline, probably a bloodline. Yeah. So the bloodline is that the bloodline of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, their bloodline is so pure that they have to marry into that bloodline.
The Shijira.
Y- y-
So
Go on,
yeah,
please tell us.
that's the Shijira, which is created as a genealogy kind of thing, right?
Yeah, yeah. I didn't know the word. I've just learned it from you. So, and I was talking to two Saudi women, university educated women, very well educated, very critical thinkers, and so on and so forth. And I was saying, so uh, help me understand this. So, you are telling me that your decision to marry somebody, being a grown up woman, being a completely, you can take your own decision. So she was telling me a story that somebody from her uh, bloodline decided to marry a man. By them, they're Muslims, by the way. They all are Muslims. Marry somebody who is not quote unquote within the pure
Cycle.
bloodline. Pure. It's interesting. It's so at the same time disgusting that how these ideas have permeated in our brain. And that is why I almost make fun of people who somewhat try to take pride in their genealogy. Do you know I come from the majestic Khan families? Wow, I'm almost shivering in fear and awe. So the thing is, I'm sorry, it's maybe the inner pain that exists in me. So she told me that somebody from her bloodline married somebody from another, and she had 4 or 5 children. And in Saudi Arabia, to this day, if that man gets killed by another tribe because this woman has violated the tribal boundary, then there is no what do you call case or filing or something. You can do it. To this day, 2021, and
So
obviously, go on,
So in
please.
India,
Mhm,
like India is very diverse. Like I keep on saying it's a world in itself. So
mhm,
each community or
mhm,
each culture or
mhm,
each religion has their own, like has their own rules.
mhm,
These rules are surprisingly more or less the same, like
mhm,
treating women as their own possessions,
mhm.
and like women being given away in marriage to the guy.
Given away. Exactly, given away.
Yeah, yes, and like and then so these are all so common, but still they remain so like close knit communities that most of the people you would hear every day in India, one person from the Dalit community, like the lower rung in the Hindu hierarchy community. And I say this with conviction is because my husband, my other half is basically from the Hindu community, and so I know them. And it is like, if the girl gets married from the higher caste and to somebody from the lower caste, the guy has no, like he doesn't live enough. I mean, there is reasons so you don't actually, not most of the time you get killed, you live, but you are so segregated, you are an outcast in several ways, you know finding jobs, finding a community, finding a home, finding, these are some of the experiences which everybody across faith, across culture, across their own tribes, they go through. And like again, coming back, what perturbs me most of the time is why do we agree to it? Like, like I myself, in my own personal life, I have a one daughter, and we have agreed to it. Like, we keep both both the kind of families and the extended families happy. I try to negotiate most of the time so that, like, at least they are, because I want to build that bridge, and I want to actually let them know that nothing, God doesn't, like, God doesn't give catastrophes around. If you marry across the religion, it will all still remain the same as what you do, in other ways. So, and so far it's okay. we have been able to live through, but the everyday experiences are difficult. Yeah,
Yeah,
usually.
I mean, I mean, engage in a critical conversations with my loved ones, my students, and my children where I can. It's not a privilege that I have all the time. I mean, I have to recognize that in full disclosure. So I talk about a particular writing of Friedrich Nietzsche, is "Thus Spoke Zarathustra." So this is where Nietzsche famously proclaimed, "God is dead. We have killed him." Right? But I don't think Friedrich Nietzsche is talking about the God that you and I can assume to be the religious God. It's
Yeah,
the blindness. It's the unquestioning tendency. And this is what Friedrich Nietzsche writes, that to abide by a tradition, a conviction, a faith without questioning is actually dishonest.
yeah.
But by the way, this is Friedrich Nietzsche. He is said, a philosopher with a hammer. He will tell you the truth, and he's not going to be very merciful telling the truth to you.
No, that's so true, and and all of us in our own
Mhm.
ways face it every day.
Hmm. Yeah,
We live with it, and we
yeah,
wouldn't acknowledge,
yeah,
and we
yeah,
wouldn't
yeah,
acknowledge. We understand. I mean,
yeah,
this is also surprising. See, Firoz, I and you, like across the globe, you're on the other side,
yeah,
and we both are talking, and there's such similarities of thoughts,
yeah.
and and things which we acknowledge that this is there,
Hmm.
but there but again, we are living with it, and we are not able to make it widely accepted. So I it gets me back to rethink people who are probably not understanding, who are not on a side, who are
Hmm.
probably not are they being true to themselves? Do they really think like this? Like like the Indian government, or in certain states, I told you that they made laws for women to go to the to get a permission to get married from the district collector. I mean, do you really need this at this time? And it is acceptable, and it is acceptable by the courts,
Hmm.
which is surprising. I mean, which is
Hmm.
very surprising, and that makes, they basically makes me. So the two gods were basically about how you envision your god and how I envision my god, but whether the two are the same, we
Hmm.
don't
Hmm.
know.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I,
and this I really loved one juncture of the story where Naima and her mother-in-law, after losing her son painfully, um, is that how they go through a mental journey.
yeah,
Actually, it's funny. One of the the line that touched me deeply when Naima tells her mother-in-law that no, I have stood by the faith of love. When Abida says, my son wouldn't have been dead if he um, chose not to marry a Hindu
yeah, yeah.
girl. Yeah, yeah.
So like she lives with the thought, because this is the thought what is inculcated,
Hmm.
but but still understand that she goes on to live with the widow of her son,
Yeah, yeah.
you know
And
because
two grandchildren,
she
beautiful
goes,
grandchildren.
yeah, because she goes by again the faith of love, and
Yeah.
not like unknowingly or without acknowledging, she
Hmm.
still stands by them,
Hmm.
and not, and which is kind of a natural pull towards that family,
Hmm.
rather than the pull for the faith,
Hmm.
which is acquired,
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
in this world.
Hmm.
So so she chose, despite the fact that she's cursing her daughter-in-law, still she stands by her daughter-in-law, because she knows that the daughter-in-law needs her more, and the
Yeah,
family
yeah,
needs her more, and
yeah,
that's what is the faith in love.
yeah, yeah. And in the end, the beautiful. I'm gonna ask you a question. I don't think you probably thought I would ask this question. In this story, the protagonist, Naima is educated in English medium school. Naima articulates things very well. Naima teaches her sons, verses from Ramayana. And then it seems to me that Naima is more, more capable of inculcating a kind of ideology, love in her sons than Abida. Why did you choose this character, Naima, to be Western modernity educated
So,
kind
so
of
it's
girl?
because of the affluence, because she came from a Hindu family and that was affluent, whereas
Mhm.
this guy, went to a religious school, and so his
Madrasa.
family, yeah, he went to a madrasa. So, so he did not, and he went to madrasa is, particularly in India, and I know in South Asia, basically
Mhm.
people choose religion when they're not affluent.
Mhm.
Education is a luxury.
Yep,
So
yep.
so people who are more affluent, because she came from a family which had more resources, she went to an English medium school, and so she was more liberated in comparison to the like the mother-in-law. But
Yes.
despite that, they were both connected by their faith in love. As I told you, why Abida chose, despite the fact that she was hurt, she was in grief, she was grieving for her son or for her dead son, but she chose to come and live with this family of the widow. You know, the widow, the marriage which is not considered marriage enough in India. you know they could have just left the woman like that, but not. You build relationship, you build that kind of bonding, and that means the faith of love is much more stronger
Mhm.
than the faith in which we are taught and indoctrinated in.
Yeah, I want to ask you a personal question. I feel lost sometimes. A deep sadness works in me, Sadia. I want to know that I think that my faith in, I mean, like these two characters in your story, my faith is love, but a love that is not the kind of love Shah Rukh Khan portrays in stupid Hindi cinemas. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That was judgmental of me. Um, my faith is in the kind of love that is political, love of solidarity, love of humanity, and that's how I see the world. But Sadia, I had to learn it. I had to learn at the expense of my own chaos inside, a schizophrenic consciousness, going through identity crisis, finding myself at the abyss of my own mess. And
I would tell you, Firoz, why do you think you had that mess? Because you were indoctrinated in a
Mhm,
particular, like the worldly religion, the worldly faith, the worldly interpretation, but that is not real. The chaos was real. you know
yeah.
that is why you were not satisfied enough. That is why you were, looking beyond what you were being taught. And that is where like most of my stories actually come back to that, whether what we are in a system, we are taught this particular thing, but is it the real thing? And if it would have been real, then we would have agreed to it, followed it without any kind of chaos within. If the inner self is not at peace, is not accepting, that is natural.
Mhm, mhm,
The
mhm,
unrest is natural.
mhm.
you know so not acknowledging the unrest, and then like really finding my own path and finding more of finding the rest inside is what is natural. So ultimately, when you talk about the solidarity and the love, you have to think back that why were you looking for it? If whatever you knew or your extent of knowledge was so robust and you were so sure of it, you wouldn't have looked for something else.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's funny. I don't know how many siblings you have. I have 11. So I was thinking, I often try to understand. And I say this to my other siblings too, very respectfully and with love and care. um, that I don't wish you the chaos that but again, I don't know why I'm going to Nietzsche again and again today. Again, Friedrich Nietzsche said that it's the chaos in you, that restlessness, that gives birth to a dancing star. Let's take a question. Uh, question is, love in case of gender and sexuality minority in South Asia is the most revolutionary work now. Um, would you like to reflect on that? They see, this is where I'm confused. I don't know how exactly to pronounce this gentleman's name.
Bappaditya. Bappaditya.
Bapaditya.
Yeah.
Bapaditya Mukherjee. Very, very good question. Thank you, sir. Could you reflect on that, Sadia?
So his question was basically to reflect on gender and sexuality minority in South Asia. It is revolutionary because we don't acknowledge it. You know, it's all undercover. Why do you have to hide behind something? Why
For
do you
loving.
for loving? Yes,
Exactly.
you know, like and that's so surprising that most of the time we do it. Like we are taught the films. You were talking about Shah Rukh Khan, and you would see the boy who is an adult man and a woman who is an adult woman, completely knowledgeable, but they can't profess their love for each other. And so is about the gender minorities or sexual minorities. I keep on saying most of the time to most religious leaders, and particularly for people who who are from the gender minorities community, is basically this is not religious. How did people know that, and why are religious leaders so mad about it? I mean, if God did not create the gender minorities, they wouldn't have been here. If they are here, that means God created them. Allah created them,
Mhm.
so they are here. They don't come as a different species. There is nothing called they are all us. We all
Exactly.
are us. So all the creation, we are one species. We need the same things. But at one point, we think that no, this person, because of the skin, because of the color of the skin, because of the language they speak, because of the name they have, because of the God they believe in, or because of the gender the gender orientation they are into, they are not enough us. They are not like us. Which is so untrue. I mean, this belief itself is untrue. So this needs to be rectified rather than the thought has to be rectified. The system has to be rectified rather than people. I mean, you would see, many Bappa's question I would come back to is many of the religious guys would come in and would talk about to rectify the gender minorities. There are medicines. They would want them to be a man or a woman. So the point is, if they are not man, or they are not man or woman enough, what happens? What changes in the world?
Mhm.
Does anything change? So why not have all of us, like whosoever is what? So I know that Bappaditya is doing revolutionary work in this field, and his question was also really good. I do understand. You know, I think the dilemma, the chaos, what you were talking about, the inner self, is when you hide yourself as to who you are, whether it is related to your gender identity or your religious identity or your your educational or your capabilities, your skills. There are people who we call disabled, but I don't know how differently abled they are.
Mhm.
So we don't we don't actually see it in those terms. And when people do not have the option to actually come out as to who they are,
Yeah.
then you are not living enough. Then
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
not then that's not living enough, and then you will have to fight for your life. That is like fighting for your life, for your freedom.
Absolutely. I will go to the story, that you actually named your book, that, small, narrow lane and other stories. Narrow lane was probably one of the most. Okay, so here is my um, spoiler alert. I say this, that I'm not good at parties. Um, I say to my siblings, I have raised my younger siblings as my own children, because like we have many. So I tell them that I'm not good at parties. My younger brother cracks wonderful jokes. My sense of humor is zero. Again, but this is what I say. I see that by facing at the reality unapologetically, it gives us an understanding where we don't feel the need to hide ourselves in toxic positivity, performative politeness,
Yeah.
the official jovialness, like, hello, Saadia, how are you? Everything is wonderful. Tell us about the story Narrow Lane, and then we will deconstruct parts of it.
So, Narrow Lane is a story of survival,
Mhm.
you know,
Brutal
survival.
survival.
Yeah. And, it's a very sad story. It's about a communal riot, which happened, like recently in our countries. In It happens all the time. Like, as I told you, many people, actually, many readers told me, these are such ordinary stories. This happen all the time. But what was not ordinary for me is, why did I not, like, what did I do? And the chaos and the restlessness, what you are talking from across, the globe, from the other side. I felt the same thing. And this story is about communal riots, about a minority family which wasn't, say, which did not, I don't know whether, which faith they were. I did not want to portray it, though it is already, there. So this was a family which was minority in terms of their faith in a certain locality, which obviously there will be. I mean, somebody will be different. Somebody will be, in some form, by their name, by their appearance, by the color of the skin, by the language they speak, by how they speak, or which gender identity they are in. They will be fewer in numbers. And that's how this family was in a particular locality, where they grew up for generations, and then they run for their life from the people with whom they were partying around every day, every night. Yeah, they were so close, and they thought they were like family members, but they were not. So
Mhm.
one family had to run away, and the saddest part about this story is, there was, even in that minority family, they had to leave the most vulnerable person
Yep. Yep.
to die, because that was it, so this shows, I mean, I don't know whether we should call it selfishness or the need of the hour, but that's how human beings are. The story ends with the death of a differently abled woman who could not run from the, like, run along with the minority family to save their life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I don't know, recently, whatever was happening in Afghanistan, I mean, like, we saw pictures, and something which bothered me a lot was, if you notice, in the airports, when the men were running and they were all hanging on the, airplanes and things like
Mhm.
that. I understand the crisis, but imagine, there were no women around, there were no children around, like, on
Mhm.
those particular days. So
Mhm.
where were they?
Mhm.
The half the population was not visible. So did they die, or were, like, or they were incapacitated, or they were captivated? So these things were all running in my mind, and I was just wondering that, why would somebody take away somebody's, like, right to live, which, again, and in the name of religion, in the sense that God has given us this particular earth land, and then we occupy some, and we call it land, like land owners, whereas the rest are landless. And I don't know, the landless cannot be in the air. We
Mhm.
are all terrestrial beings. We have to live on earth.
Mhm.
So, we will have to find a way to do it. You can't just, like, you will have to give that space. You'll have to
Mhm.
share the land.
Mhm. Yeah. 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 You see, Marx talked about it, and then I often give reference of this book, a very small book. It's called Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher, a small book. In that book, the author starts with a very powerful observation that Our imagination is colonized by
Yeah.
capitalist ideals. And in that, Mark Fisher laments by saying that in films, in movies, we can even think about the end of the planet Earth in a dystopian film. But you and I cannot possibly think about alternative ways of being, loving, caring without capitalist ways of being. Our relationships are merely exchange. I am doing this for you. What are you doing for me? And
Yeah.
in this exchange, I lose the essence, which I don't know how to explain, how to define. So I compromise my own humanity.
I agree with you, Firoz. Like those are the challenges, with my limited understanding and with my challenged mind. Basically, I cannot think beyond also. And that brings in the chaos inside, the inner chaos. You live with it and you keep on thinking, like this is true that these stories are mere stories, small stories, probably just to make people aware that this is how it is when situations arise. But I really cannot think beyond of a system or a way to bring in the uh, kind of the world what we think would be better. I mean, see, for every small creature like you and me or human being, we would just want to live. First you will live and then you will do something. Somebody else takes away my right to live, my right to a dignified life is based, just because of my gender or my gender identity or my name or my faith. That's not the right thing. I mean, we all know that that's not good enough for any of us. So like even if we do not have an alternative, we do understand that this is not good enough, whatever is there.
Mhm, mhm. And yeah, and we train our children to look at the world with an weaponized sense of self.
Yeah.
The and this is what also this is what the violence, right? If I am and please pardon my empty sophistry if it is. Um, if I somehow see that you're different from me, it's because of my own fragmentation inside, my own fragmentation, my own brokenness. Um, because somehow society, by definition, is a structure, and no structure is innocent. A
Absolutely.
structure is a structure because it lets somebody in by excluding somebody. So society is a structure. And by the way, I'm not saying that, and this is where not I'm not sliding into, the idealistic pessimism, idealizing pessimism. No, I'm not. I mean, this again, I go back to Rabindranath. Rabindranath never lost faith in human beings.
Yeah.
And he believed that losing faith in humans is the greatest sin. He did not lose faith in humanity. It's unfortunate. I think
We should
India,
not. We
yeah,
are humans, so we
yeah,
cannot lose faith in
yeah,
humanity. I mean, that's
yeah.
what we have. You know,
Yeah, that's
that's
all we got.
what
That's all
we've
we
got.
got. I think India needs now a lot more Rabindranath than Gandhi. We need to understand the politics of Rabindranath
Absolutely.
because his work, because he worked to enlighten us from inside. So I don't know when we will do that. Last question to you, Sadia. Dilara from Bangladesh, she's a development worker. She's saying that even after writing the story, Sadia, did you ever felt somewhere you could not do justice as per your values and principles? What you did at the time of resistance?
Chaya, this is absolutely true. Like I really could not do justice as per the values or principles what I really feel within, because like again, when you write a story, it is for the larger audience. Like you write for people to understand. You don't write when people do not get you.
Hmm.
And there have been moments of that kind of conflict in me, that whether I am able to explain myself through the stories in a way which can create a kind of empathy in others, in my readers, whether they can empathize. As I this is one, when you're talking about a moment of resistance, this is true that I live it all the time, that I keep on thinking that if this was a situation, what would I do? And and whether I will go with the larger community, which probably I will, because I probably do not have that kind of strength, or do I have? And if I have, then what will be my steps? This keeps haunting me all the time. You know what? I will tell you a small story. Recently, there was a very young girl, who was brutally raped in India, and the rape story made big headlines. She came from a Dalit family, and that girl died. So, she was raped by four guys, her neighbors, who came from the powerful community, and then she was dragged in the fields. But you know what? This girl came to the hospital. She could reach the hospital, but she reached the police station first. The policemen did not provide her due, uh, they did not provide her due support. She was taken to the hospital. The hospital did not provide her. So it is not just the rapist, the four criminals who actually failed her. It was, and what did I do? Is I was watching this entire story on television day after day, debates on whether the society do enough for the woman, or it did not do enough, and who was right and who was wrong, and what was the situation, what was the girl wearing, how did she incite the guys, and whether. But imagine, they were doctors, they were police officers, they were like mute spectators like me and the rest of the country, and we were just debating, and that women died. I mean, there was a life lost for no reason. And that's what, the moment of resistance, what you're talking, keeps on haunting me all the time. I mean, I do not know whether it's like a writer or like an ordinary person, but yes, definitely this is what I think is humanity, which keeps bothering you. So I think we should listen more to the humanity part. Maybe we'll have more ideas to react to these kind of situation, rather than you know think it more professionally and thinking that, okay, I am a policeman, I am only supposed to write like the first information reports and do nothing more. And like, say a media person would go and click pictures and think that this is what am I supposed to do, is take the picture of the girl and not do enough. So you can imagine that girl, it took 6 hours. She had a broken spinal cord, and it took 6 hours to give her even first aid, and she died in the hospital.
Yeah, yeah. I think I
That was
often
good.
quote, yeah.
This was a good discussion. I'm so thankful. You
Oh,
let me
thank
open
you.
my heart.
No, thank you, thank you. I mean, I think these conversations are so needed, and I should have probably told you in the beginning. So what we do, we use these conversations, and young students, high school students, college students, university students, they watch these conversations in Bangladesh, in many other parts, so that it actually creates a dialogue to understand. Because you see, I don't know, maybe today is my Friedrich Nietzsche day. Nietzsche's one other understanding was that we are born with an animal instinct, but we are probably the only species that is burdened to give birth to a human
Yeah.
out of that. Other than that, um, I don't think I and this is same one thing common between you, me, and Dilara, that we all are parents. Dilara has a daughter. She's 11 years old, 10, 10, 11 years old. And one day I was watching one of her, and the kind of critical consciousness that a young girl has at this age, I am so immensely proud of her. um, I have a 16-year-old son, and the kind of conversation that I have with him in terms of understanding the world, and I really, really don't hide.
Mhm.
I tell him the insignificance and flaws and chaos his father bears in him, how utterly he falls flat on his faces all the time, how he's somehow tumbling along, you know, this um, existence. I don't know. I mean, my friends sometimes have told me that I have existential angst all the time, and I don't see anything bad in it. So Arundhati Roy has written that never to look away from what is ugly and cruel, because if we do for our own comfort, that's selfish. That is very selfish. Yeah, we see it all the time in the north. Sadia, this is the beginning of our conversation. We will need to have more conversations, and I know that you're located in Kolkata, right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, Kolkata. And by your spirit, I can assume that you're also engaged in many scenes of these
Yes.
conversations. I hope to collaborate with you more and more and learn. So far, I haven't, and then this is one of my goals, that I need to do a lot of collaborations from Kolkata, from
Mhm.
the artificially created border, the western side of it. And I often say to, the other day I was talking, and sorry, I have given this example several times. Uh, Somebody, an older brother from Kolkata, got very mad at me, saying that the way I was speaking Bangla was utterly nonsense, that I don't know how to pronounce even Bangla. And I was saying, okay, I get it, but I really am not bothered how I pronounce Bangla, or I couldn't give a damn that how my English sounds.
Mhm.
I'm interested in the content. I'm interested in the content of your consciousness. And I'm not interested in debate. I'm interested in dialogue. I want to understand you, Sadi. I want to understand your consciousness.
Absolutely.
Um, so I look forward to have many more collaborations with you. And so far, our audience who have been with us, thank you very much for listening to um, heartfelt but maybe heavy conversation.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you, Sadia. Sadia, can you stay back just 1 minute? Yeah, go on. Sadia, কিছু বলতে চাচ্ছিলেন? You wanted to
No,
say
no,
something to
that's
her?
fine. Thank you. I just wanted to thank you for this opportunity. It was really good. And, like I would like to continue the conversation because it's, your platform has been a learning experience. I've been following it. And, like I really felt that it is a learning. It needs to reach out to more and more people in the region. And, this would be just our small step to
Mhm,
probably, like know each other and know,
mhm.
like again that we will only be gaining by partnering, by collaborating, and we will not be losing anything. So I am really thankful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Sadia, can you please stay back for a second? I just need to finish this.